Today is December 23rd, 2022. I want to talk about the latest military assistance package put together by the United States for Ukraine. This comes to us from the U.S. Department of Defense. This press release, $1.85 billion in additional security assistance for Ukraine. It's dated December 21st, 2022. And if we look, you can see quite a long list. And it's actually broken into two parts. So the first part is the presidential drawdown. This is coming from existing U.S. stockpiles. And then the second list, these are contracts that the U.S. government is paying for arms manufacturers to fulfill. And these look like large numbers. This is mostly ammunition for Soviet-era weapons. But as I will show, it really is not that significant. And these are not contracts that the U.S. puts out for often. First and foremost on this list, however, is the Patriot air defense system. So I was talking about how there was a discussion about whether to send these or not. They are sending at least one battery of Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine. And I have already talked about the shortcomings of the Patriot missile system extensively. I did a video on this. The link will be in the video description below. But to summarize these points, let's go over this more recent Guardian article. Providing U.S. Patriot missiles could transform Ukraine's defenses, but it's a move with risks. And this article was pointed out to me by Alexander Mikuris of the Duran. I will put a link into the video where he talks about this article. But let's take a look at this article and let's see what the shortcomings are, even according to the Western media. So the article says, it is important to note that the system will not provide immediate protection, and so Russian strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure are likely to continue in the short term. Patriot is a complex system to both operate and maintain. Previously provided equipment without requisite training on how to maintain and repair it in combat conditions has suffered from maintenance issues. In ensuring that the Ukrainians can operate the system sustainably will take time. So number one, training. It will take months to train entry-level operators on how to use the Patriot missile system. But with all complex weapon systems, a battery is not going to be operated by only entry-level personnel. That's a fact. You have to have experienced operators with years of experience also helping operate and lead the operation of these systems. Even a main battle tank has entry-level operators, drivers, a loader in the West for Western main battle tanks. But then you have more experienced personnel. Also, the tank commander has years of experience. If you just threw entry-level operators into a tank, it will not be as effective. And the same goes for the Patriot missile system, which is why a lot of analysts, including myself, suspect that NATO personnel will actually be involved in operating Patriot missile system to at least a certain extent. The Guardian article continues. It says, as Ukraine's stocks of air defense missiles have fallen, the country has become increasingly dependent on international support, just as it now relies on its partners for the majority of its artillery ammunition and armored vehicles. That reliance comes with some risks, especially for systems for which Ukraine's partners have limited stocks, which is pretty much all of them. Some fear that giving certain military support to Ukraine risks wider escalation, but this is not the basis for U.S. reluctance to send Patriot systems. The U.S. has significantly fewer of them than its own operational analysis suggests are necessary to defend its forces in the Indo-Pacific. Moreover, there is continuing demand for missiles from existing users, from Sweden to Saudi Arabia. The latter expends a significant number of missiles each month in defense of its critical national infrastructure. Missile manufacturing levels, meanwhile, are low. So number one is training. Number two, stockpiles of the missiles the Patriot missile system uses are small. They're insufficient. And production is also small and insufficient. Now, I have talked about how from 2018, Lockheed Martin was talking about doubling missile production from 250 missiles a year to 500 missiles a year. This is an article from last year, 2021. Lockheed Martin accelerates production of PAC-3 MSE. And they're talking about reaching that annual production rate of 500 by 2024. So they're not even there yet. They won't be there this year. They won't be there next year. The year after, they will be producing 500 missiles a year, which still is not enough. Even if every single missile Lockheed Martin produced in a year, all 500, were sent to Ukraine, Russia launches thousands of missiles and drones. Since this operation began in late February, they have launched thousands of missiles and drones. Just in less than a year, Lockheed Martin can only produce 500 missiles a year. So you can see what the problem is. And some people will say, well, we're also sending NASAMS and IRIS-T in very tiny quantities. It really is not enough. And in order to increase production from 250 to 500 missiles per year, Lockheed Martin had to build an 85,000 square foot expansion at its production facility. So in order to expand production further beyond 500 missiles a year, they will have to build another massive extension, and that will take years plural. And number three, which The Guardian really doesn't talk about, is the capability of the Patriot system to actually intercept missiles, drones, and other threats in Ukrainian airspace. So The Guardian didn't talk about it, but I want to show you this article from Time magazine. What can a US-supplied Patriot missile system do for Ukraine? And this is what it says. It says Raytheon, which manufactures the Patriot, says it has been involved in 150 intercepts of ballistic missiles since 2015, which, to be honest, is not all that impressive. The success rate of the Patriot, however, has been repeatedly questioned. A 1992 Government Accountability Office report said it could not find evidence to support reports that the system had achieved a 70% success rate against Scud missiles in the Gulf War. In 2018, Saudi Arabia's success in using Patriots against missiles fired by Houthi rebels in Yemen was questioned when video surfaced of systems failing. So that's what we know from the Western media about the Patriot missile system, which is the highlight of this this aid package. Let's look at other items on this list. Let's continue through the Pentagon list of what they're sending Ukraine. They say additional ammunition for high mobility artillery rocket system, HIMARS. And I think it's interesting because the same Guardian article that I was just citing regarding the Patriot missile system also talked about HIMARS. And this is what it said. Patriot is certainly capable of downing Iranian-made Shahed 136s, munitions that have also been used to hit energy infrastructure. But if it is used in this role, Kiev will run out of missiles fast. This has already happened with, they're talking about the rockets fired by HIMARS, GMLRS. These are guided rockets. The long-range rockets provided to Ukraine. Although its forces were initially careful to use these rockets against high-priority targets, it has increasingly been employed more widely, contributing to operational success in the liberation of Kherson, but significantly exceeding the rate of consumption of these missiles supportable by Ukraine's partners. So they're running out of munitions for HIMARS. They're already having a Patriot missile shortage, and Ukraine most certainly will burn through far more than the US can sustain. This is the point that The Guardian is trying to make. I also want to point out that this operational success they're talking about around Kherson, we remember that Russia voluntarily left the west bank of the Dnieper River. They left Kherson city voluntarily, and they crossed the bridges that these HIMARS were supposed to have destroyed. Well, they insufficiently damaged them. They were able to use the bridges to withdraw, and Russian demolition teams were actually the ones who completely destroyed these bridges. So this talk about HIMARS, just like everything else the US is sending to Ukraine, the Western media tries to build up in the minds of its audiences the capabilities of these systems that just are not being borne out on the actual battlefield. Now, again, it's not that HIMARS is not allowing Ukraine to carry out relatively long-range precision strikes. They can do that with HIMARS. There's no doubt that they're doing that. But this is not a capability that Russia doesn't also have, and in greater abundance. I've talked about the Tornado S is a multiple launch rocket system. It also fires satellite guided rockets. Instead of using the US GPS system, it's using the Russian GLONASS system. It can fire further than HIMARS, and each launcher has more rockets loaded at a time. Russia also has the Iskander missile system, which fires missiles similar to the ATACMS that Ukraine continuously asks Washington for, and that Washington refuses to give Ukraine. Russia has the Iskander missile system. They have many more of these, and these missiles are just as precise as ATACMS. They fire further than ATACMS, 400 to 500 kilometers versus the ATACMS 300 kilometers. So again, these are all things to keep in mind. The Ukrainians are asking for these supposed wonder weapons. These are systems that Russia already has in very large numbers. Getting back to the assistance package, it also is providing 500 precision-guided 155mm artillery rounds. And they're talking about the GPS-guided Excalibur round. And this is a very small number, 500 artillery rounds. That is a small number. But the argument will be made that these are precision-guided shells, and one precision-guided shell is worth multiple conventional shells. So it's 500. It actually represents a larger number of conventional shells to accomplish the same task. And I just want to show you this from Raytheon Missiles and Defense. They're talking about their Excalibur projectile. And this is what it says. By using the Excalibur projectile's level of precision, there is a dramatic reduction in the time, cost, and logistical burden associated with other artillery munitions. And they're talking about analysis has shown that on average, it can take at least 10 conventional munitions to accomplish what one Excalibur weapon can. So if you take 500 and you times it by 10, that's 5,000. Conventional, so 500 Excalibur rounds does the work of 5,000 conventional rounds. But as the Western media has pointed out, Ukraine can fire between 4,000 to 6,000 rounds per day. So 500 Excalibur rounds is about one day's worth of ammunition for Ukraine. That is a serious problem. Ukraine is not getting 500 Excalibur rounds per day, per week. They're getting this per month. And notice how on this list there are no conventional 155mm rounds. That is something that you'll see usually 2 packages per month. And the conventional rounds are usually in one package, and there could be a number of precision-guided rounds in each or every other package. Also listed are 10 120mm mortar systems and 10,000 rounds, 10 82mm mortar systems, and 10 60mm mortar systems. So altogether, different diameters, 30 mortar systems that they're sending to Ukraine. 30 mortar systems for a large-scale war along a 1,000 kilometer plus line of contact, just to put it into perspective. They're also sending 37 Cougar mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, these MRAPs. This is surplus from Afghanistan. These are armored vehicles. They can protect against small arms ammunition, but virtually everything else Russia is using on the battlefield can destroy these. These are not a replacement for armored personnel carriers, infantry fighting vehicles, and certainly not a replacement for main battle tanks. And these are all things that Ukraine desperately needs and are not getting. And instead, they're getting things like MRAPs. They're also getting, in this package, 120 Humvees, glorified SUVs. And they depending on what version they get, it could be armored and able to protect against small arms ammunition. But again, everything else will destroy these and kill everyone inside. 6 armored utility trucks. Again, we're talking about a war along a 1,000 kilometer plus line of contact. 6 utility trucks does what to help Ukraine? They're talking about the high-speed anti-radiation missiles. These are the anti-radar missiles that are being used by the very small number of aircraft in Ukraine's Air Force. I have not heard any success stories from the Western media about this. If I had, I would report it. I have not heard anything about these. They're also talking about precision aerial munitions. They're talking about guided bombs, again, being used by whatever is left of Ukraine's Air Force. Highly unlikely either one of these or both of these together is going to make any difference. Again, we're talking about a very large scale conflict, a 1,000 plus kilometer line of contact. And we're talking about Russia that has its whole Air Force at its disposal and some of the best air defense systems on Earth at their disposal. Also on the list is over 2,700 grenade launchers and small arms. So when you think about a single brigade is 4,000 men, maybe you could spread these grenade launchers over a couple of brigades. And small arms, they don't even give a number or any information about what type of small arms. Claymore anti-personnel munitions, demolition munitions, and equipment, night vision devices and optics, tactical secure communication systems, body armor, and other field equipment. So it's just basic things that every army needs and gets, including the Russian military. And they're putting all of these items in the list to make it look like a long list, when in reality, the actual significant systems being transferred over to Ukraine are very small in number. As you can notice on this list, there are no additional armored personnel vehicles. There's no infantry fighting vehicles, no more tanks, no more HIMARS launchers. If these are such great systems making such a difference, why is the US not sending anymore? Because they're admittedly out of rockets for them. You send more launchers, you have to divide what's left of the rockets among more launchers, you will run out even faster. So this is a problem, and this is a problem they cannot solve anytime soon. Now let's talk about this US Department of Defense Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, or USAI. The second component of that list. They say 45,152 millimeter artillery rounds. So 152 millimeter rounds. This is used for Soviet era artillery that Ukraine would have. In addition to the 155 millimeter systems NATO members have been giving Ukraine. Again, at 6,000 rounds per day, 45,000 rounds will last about a week. And this is a contract that they're putting out for some arms manufacturer to fulfill. When are they going to put in another contract? Probably not next week. 20,122 millimeter artillery rounds. So this is another Soviet era type of round. Again, 20,000 rounds. That represents about half a week of if you're firing artillery rounds at 4,000 to 6,000 a day. 50,122 millimeter Grad rockets. Now, these are unguided rockets. They're like HIMARS, but they're unguided rockets. And so say, 50,000, that sounds like a lot, but you have to fire these in large numbers all at one time because they're not guided. They're going to hit a general area, so you fire many of them all at one time, and you just cover the entire area with these rockets. And you're basically erasing grids off of the map, and that is what makes them effective. So a single Grad launcher might have something like 40 barrels, 40 rockets that it'll fire in a salvo. A Russian battalion tactical group will have about 6 of these launchers. You're talking one salvo, 240 rockets at a time. That's a lot of rockets. You say you fire 5 times a day, you're going to be done with 50,000 rounds in about a month or a month and a half, something like that. They're also putting in a contract for 100,000 rounds of 125 millimeter tank ammunition. So this is for Soviet-era tanks, the T-72, T-80, Ukraine's T-64. A single T-72 carries about 45 rounds, and in very intense fighting, you may or may not use that in a day. A single brigade has about 90 tanks. So let's say a whole brigade of 90 tanks, each one fires about 5 rounds per day. 100,000 rounds is not even going to last you a year. So like 250 days, something like that, for a single brigade of 90 tanks. And 5 rounds per day, I think that is a very reasonable number. We're not talking exact numbers. This is just to put this number in perspective. They say 100,000 tank rounds. You think, wow, that's a lot. But if you have a single brigade with 90 tanks and they fire 5 rounds per day, before the year is over, they will be done with that 100,000 rounds. Are they going to put another contract in before the end of the year? You know, over the course of the next 365 days? I don't think so. They're talking about SATCOM terminals and services, so maybe they're talking about paying for Starlink, I don't know. And funding for training, maintenance, and sustainment. But again, we're talking about this entire situation where the West is out of everything for Ukraine. So funding, maintenance, sustainment for extremely inadequate amounts of weapons, ammunition, and supporting equipment. And even in terms of training, I've gone over the programs that the UK is putting together, the United States is putting together, and I've explained how they are too short in duration. They're not long enough to properly train these conscripts that are being pressed into service by Ukraine. And it's not being done on a scale large enough to even come close to replacing Ukraine's losses on the battlefield. This is a problem altogether that is going to continue to accumulate in terms of the impact it has on Ukraine's fighting capacity. Looking at this package at the end of the year, at the end of 2022, it's very obvious that the amount of support the West is providing continues to shrink, both in terms of quantities, just the number of what is being sent, and also the quality of what is being sent. I also want to show you this fact sheet. This was also included with this assistance package. This is fact sheet on U.S. security assistance to Ukraine, December 21st, 2022. This is absolutely everything the U.S. has sent to Ukraine. All of these packages that I've been going over the last couple of months, since February, really, everything is on this list. And when you look at this list, you realize how, number one, how little the U.S. has actually sent in total when you're looking at the total numbers, and how Ukraine has actually gone through almost all of this already. So they're talking about the Javelin anti-tank missile and Stinger anti-aircraft missile. They've burned through those, and the U.S. is not going to be able to even replace what they sent Ukraine, let alone produce the large numbers that Ukraine would actually need to continue using them at the level that they had before they ran out. They're talking about 142 M777 howitzers. Many of those are either completely destroyed or they're breaking down. And again, this is something the Western media has admitted. 36 105 millimeter howitzers. This is a smaller caliber, less capable howitzer that they're sending because it's just something that they have that they can send Ukraine. Not because it's most appropriate, it's because it's what they have in their inventory. In terms of Soviet-era ammunition, I just went over that. That is the contract that they put out. I have no idea when that's actually going to get delivered. I'm going to look into that. In terms of air defense, they're talking about the Hawk air defense system. I've gone over that. That hasn't been used by the U.S. for over 20 years. They're pulling them out of storage, restoring them to send them to Ukraine. They list 8 National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems, NASAMS. I've talked about this in the past. They pledged to send 8, but they don't have 8 to send Ukraine right now. They sent maybe 1 or 2 this year, another 2 or 3 next year, and then the rest after that. They're not going to get these all at one time. If you had them all at one time, they would have an accumulative effect in terms of protecting Ukrainian airspace. But because they're sending everything in this trickle, these dribs and drabs, Russia is able to wipe them off the battlefield before the next delivery is made. And the Patriot missile battery that I just talked about and all of the shortcomings associated with that. On the list is also 45 T-72s. That's part of the 90 T-72s the U.S. paid to have restored and sent to Ukraine from stockpiles in Eastern Europe. 200 M113 armored personnel transports. Most of these have been destroyed during the Kharkov and Kherson offensives. Notice how those are not on the list anymore being sent to Ukraine. Helicopters, they sent 20 Mi-17s. No more of those are being sent because they don't have any more. And 1,200 Humvees. I've talked about this. They send these a couple of hundred at a time. They're glorified SUVs. That's what they are. And it's because Ukraine had large numbers of these type of vehicles. They've been destroyed. The US is sending theirs. They're also being destroyed. There's also different types of radars that they've sent to Ukraine, and you see videos of Russia blowing these up almost on a daily basis. They have multiple types of suicide drones listed, but again, I've not heard the Western media talk about these at all. And I'm imagining that if they had even the slightest bit of success, we would have heard about them. Instead, what we've heard from the likes of the Washington Times and the Washington Post, the New York Times, in this fighting, when Ukraine is trying to use their drones, Russia is jamming them. And they're extremely frustrated about that. And they've asked the United States for help countering that. They're also talking about 350 generators. That's something that they've just been sending relatively recently, 150, 200 at a time now. So it's up to 350. 350 generators. It doesn't even matter how big these generators are. You're talking about a whole country whose power grid is being annihilated for both civilian and military applications. What is 350 generators going to do to help? Think about the scale of this conflict and think about this list of support sent in dribs and drabs over the last 10 months, 10, 11 months. So it'll soon be a year. It really is not enough. And this is not something they can continuously send. So many of the things on this list, that's it. That's all the US can send. They cannot send more for years to come. What about Russia? What about Russian production numbers? We don't know. I don't know what Russia's production numbers are. There is not a vast amount of information about Russian military industrial capacity. They are state-owned enterprises. They're not companies like in the West. So a lot of this information is not publicly available. But what we do know is that Russia prepared for years and years to fight this specific conflict. This type of intense, protracted, large-scale warfare. They prepared for it by creating immense stockpiles of weapons and ammunition. This is something that even the Pentagon has admitted. The way Russia organized its military before this conflict began, using the battalion tactical group as the basic unit that they're going to organize their entire army around. This is between 600 to 800 soldiers, and it includes a very large amount of heavy weapons, tanks, self-propelled artillery, multiple launch rocket systems, air defense systems. They were preparing to fight large-scale warfare. Look at the United States military. Look at the brigade combat team. This is how the U.S. has organized its military. They created the brigade combat team to fight these small wars all around the globe. Likewise, the U.S. and Western arms industry, they have organized themselves around supplying these small wars all around the globe. Meanwhile, we can only assume that if Russia prepared the type of weapons and the type of military they needed for this intense large-scale combat, their military-industrial complex would likewise be prepared to supply it in the middle of this type of intense large-scale combat. We can only assume that, and it really does seem like that is the case, because we see T-90 tanks still arriving on the battlefield. This is the newest, one of the newest tanks that Russia has. It's the newest tank that they have that they're actually using on the battlefield. We saw at least 200 of these show up in the Donbas region recently. That's a large amount of tanks to just show up fresh on the battlefield. We've seen the Western media citing Ukrainian claims that Russia is making at least 40 cruise missiles of all kinds every single month. That is a pretty large number, but the number's actually probably larger than that. And then if they're able to make at least 40, but probably more cruise missiles per month, they're probably also making a large amount of small arms ammunition, artillery of different calibers, diameters, and also rockets, different types of rockets, and other kinds of missiles like the Iskander missile, the long-range precision-guided Iskander missile. So going back to this Guardian article that I cited all the way at the beginning of this video about the Patriot missile system, this is what the Guardian says. It says, Russia's invasion of Ukraine should prompt the regeneration of NATO's industrial base, investing in munitions factories and critical machine tooling, but this will take time. And I'll tell you, it will take years, several years at least. And these are years that Ukraine simply does not have. And so what is going to happen to Ukraine is it's going to lose. But the West, as we can see, is going to encourage Ukraine to fight on anyway, to compound the disaster as much as possible. And this is what happens to U.S. proxies. They are consumed and destroyed. It's what happened to South Vietnam during the Vietnam War. It's what happened to Afghanistan. The regime the U.S. placed into power in Afghanistan, it was destroyed. And the regime in Ukraine and the nation of Ukraine will also, and is right in front of us, being destroyed. So we'll just keep an eye on this. I'll continue keeping track. This is toward the end of the year. I'll continue keeping track of what the U.S. and others are sending Ukraine and putting the numbers in perspective all throughout next year. It would be nice to see this conflict end as soon as possible, but it looks like the West is intent on keeping it going for as long as possible, for as long as profitable. Win or lose, U.S. arms manufacturers are already making billions. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. All of my YouTube videos are backed up on Odyssey and Rumble. Subtitles for my YouTube videos, they'll show up eventually. They're auto-generated. I have no control over how long that takes. They will show up eventually. I know that's important to some people. Everything that I cited in this video will be in the video description below, as will be ways you can help support my work. I don't monetize my YouTube channel at all. If you see an ad pop up, feel free to skip it or to block it. If you do want to support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee and also Patreon. To everyone who has been helping support my work, whether it's through one-time donations, month-to-month donations, or even if you're just sharing my work with others, I greatly appreciate all of that. That is what makes this work possible. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.